Thank you, and to those who might be surprised to see me or were expecting a different talk, I hope you'll be surprised and delighted by what you hear instead. What I'm going to be talking about today is a whole brain functional connectivity marker that was developed on a small cohort at the NIH, in which the mean functional connectivity for a given subject observed while they were reading strongly predicts how well they'll perform on reading recall questions afterwards. And today we're going to take the important but difficult step of seeing how well those predictions generalize to new participants, namely in the HCP dataset. And because Human Connectome Project subjects perform a number of different tasks in the magnet and a number of behavioral assessments outside of it, we can ask questions about specificity. That is, does our reading network only predict reading related behaviors, or will it also predict other behaviors like IQ? And we can ask questions about functional connectivity specificity. That is, do we need brain activity observed while someone is reading in order for this to be predictive, or would it also predict if we were using data from an emotional faces task or REST? And on our way to these questions, we're going to talk briefly about the method used to derive the network and about what the network looks like before we get to these generalization and specificity questions. I necessarily have to go fast for a short talk, but if you have more questions about this, I hope you'll come see me at poster 2093. The method we use to derive this network is called connectome-based predictive modeling, or CPM. And it's a relatively simple method but is a little different from what you might have seen in machine learning talks in the past, so I'll go over it briefly. You separate the brain into parcels, onto nodes, and then you identify a set of edges whose functional connectivity correlates positively or negatively with behavioral performance across subjects. You can think of this as a sort of mask of the functional connectivity matrix, and if you apply that to the matrix from each individual subject, you get a single number that we hope correlates with that subject's performance on the task. Now, this has been used successfully to find networks associated with fluid intelligence, sustained attention, and most recently creativity. And we were interested in extending this to reading recall. I probably don't need to convince this room of how important reading is to your educational performance and your general success in the modern world. But another reason that I like it is that the way we do reading in the scanner can be very similar to how we do it in real life. And so we had our subjects perform a naturalistic reading task where they can move their eyes freely across the page and read at their own pace. And as they read, we played distracting sounds, either white noise or irrelevant speech, just to simulate reading in a noisy environment. And after they read, we asked them questions about what they had read and found that there was a pretty good distribution across subjects of how well they could recall the reading. So again, we're going to apply this method to that data set. This is data acquired while they were reading, not while they were answering the questions. And so we find the functional connectivity matrix for each subject. We identify the sets of edges that we found to be predictive using leave one out cross-validation to make sure we're not double dipping. We see how well the mean functional connectivity in that network predicts behavior. And we find that there's a pretty strong correlation that outperforms permutation tests. We do expect to get a little boost from leave one out cross-validation. It's hard to say how big that boost will be, and that's one of the reasons that we want to see how well this generalizes out of sample. But before we get to that, I want to talk briefly about the reading network itself, which you can see from this small image here is drawing information from all over the brain. This includes some edges that you might not have picked a priori, but do make a kind of sense. For example, if we just look at the edges that include an occipital ROI, we find that good readers have stronger functional connectivity between occipital regions and left temporal pole, which makes a kind of sense in a task where your job is to translate visual input to semantic understanding. So today what we're going to do is see if this will generalize to new participants from the Human Connectome Project dataset, and this is 710 subjects performing a variety of different tasks and a variety of different behavioral assessments, some of which have a greater connection to reading than others. And remember that we're training on a reading data set. We're training the network on a reading data set, and we're going to apply that to every combination of task and behavior, but it's always about reading. So we're going to say, how much does a subject look like a good reader when they're doing this task, and how much does that good readerness correlate with a certain behavior. It's also important to note that we're training on a different set of subjects and task and behavior than the ones we're testing on. So this is a tall order to begin with. So to start with, we're going to look at our best chance for success, the language task and the oral reading recognition behavior. It's important to note that the language task involves a story, but it's auditory, not visual. So our visually derived network is at a bit of a disadvantage. But we're still able to find a significant correlation between the connectivity in that network and the oral reading recognition behavior. This has no trouble reaching significance. However, you're going to notice that the correlation is much weaker. So this is not going to be used as a diagnostic anytime soon. But the fact that we have strong significance means that we can still learn something about specificity. And so to do that, we're going to fill in the rest of this matrix. Here, we're just looking at the correlation between one task and one behavior, which is just one. So the R value becomes one value in this matrix. Oops. We're now going to fill in the rest of it by testing every task combination and behavior. What might we expect to see then? One possibility is that our predictions are very specific to reading behaviors, and we always predict reading behavior but nothing else. What we see, in fact, is more like this. There are a number of combinations of task and behavior in which our network is predictive. It's a little tough to parse at a glance, but it's easier to get a take-home message if we collapse across rows and just look at the mean across all the tasks and compare the different behaviors. So here we see that the behavior our network is best able to predict is, in fact, the oral reading recognition behavior. It outperforms the others significantly, with the exception of the one you see there without the star, which in fact is the picture vocabulary task, another language-related behavior. Another thing we might have seen is what I call the evoked activity hypothesis. Maybe they needed to be doing a language task in order to get any predictive activity or connectivity. Here's that same matrix again. This time we're going to collapse across columns and compare the different fMRI tasks. Here we see again that the language task does give us better prediction. However, that difference is much smaller and in many cases is not significant, so it's difficult to say with certainty. When interpreting these results, it's important to keep a few things in mind. We're using different scanning sites and different parameters to train and test this model. There are slightly different pre-processing pipelines, and again, these are different tasks and behaviors. So all of those will reduce the level of generalization we might expect. When looking at specificity, these tasks have different durations, and that affects the stability of the functional connectivity you can measure. It's nice to note that the language task provides the best predictive ability, even though it's shorter than the rest scans or the working memory scans. We also note that some behavioral tasks have better distributions than others, and sometimes subjects are performing at ceiling. But we did find that this marker of reading ability correlated significantly with reading ability in the Human Connectome Project dataset, just not at diagnostic levels. This performance is moderately specific to reading behaviors and weakly specific to functional connectivity in the network. With that, I'd like to thank my coworkers at the NIMH, all of my co-authors, and all of you for listening. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for David? Yes. No, they're not moving. Okay. Actually, I have a question for you. I mean, it's very exciting work. Did you have a wordless task? So I'm wondering, because when you're reading a passage, right, there's a lot of comprehension involved. That's why your PVVT was sort of correlated with that in terms of looking at comprehension. But with wordless, it might be slightly different.
It's a good question. We didn't have that task available. It would be interesting to try to link this better to the literature, to have sort of orthographic, phonographic tasks, to sort of break this down into pieces the way that much of what we see in the literature is broken down. That's something that we haven't done yet. I also think it'll be interesting to look more deeply at specific connections that are seen in our network that we might not have expected. There are a lot of frontal regions that come online, and that might be because we're using a naturalistic task. So that's something we might drill down into in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. For our next speaker,